Well, good morning again. Yeah, hard to believe it's still morning, but it is. Yeah, thank you again for sitting so well and so concentrated and still. At least that's how it seems from here. It may seem a little different in here, right? But I always look out and I see everyone sitting so still, and that encourages me too to sit still. I see that on Zoom too, everybody sitting still. I sometimes suspect people have taken a screenshot of themselves and posted that and then gone off to make breakfast, but but that 30 minutes, my goodness, it's a good period of time. It's long enough. It's long enough, right? It's about the period of time that it takes for an incense stick to burn down. Before anyone had a phone or even a wristwatch, just put a stick of incense in, and that's how long a period would be. But it's long enough typically for often when we begin to sit, we have little recency bias for what's going through the mind, and then that'll begin to maybe just soften and there's some necessary processing that goes on, and then a stillness starts to come into realization, what we call realization. Become more aware, maybe 15, 20 minutes. Maybe during that time we will drift off, thinking about this and that, and get lost for a little time, lost in the long grass. And then we'll notice, then just noticing without judgment. It's not to beat oneself up about that. The mind is busy. The world is chaotic. But then when we notice we're drifting, just coming back, simple focus, like our breathing, to come back to be present. And so when we practice presence, being present, being mindful and aware, then you become a person who is present and mindful and aware. Right? Simple, straightforward, but like many things that are simple and straightforward, also subtle and difficult, and requires effort, and it's work like everything else. Even to sit still for 30 minutes sounds counterintuitive. Should be the easiest thing in the world, right? And yet we know that when we apply the discipline of the practice to meditate or to sit when it's the thing that you want to do least. You're not in the right mood, or there's 101 things to do, but there's always 101 things to do. So to carve out that time like you have here today, that's a powerful investment in the health and well-being of the body-mind. And when your body-mind is healthy and present, then that's what's transmitted to the people in our sphere of activity. That's what's transmitted to the world in our own small way. But that own small way can have profound effects. You don't see how the ripples of practice, the ripples of positive intention, ripple out, and the waves. Right? It's one snowflake that causes an avalanche in the end. Maybe not the right metaphor, but an avalanche of kindness. Yeah. So we've had this series of looking at the Eightfold Path. I hope that's something of interest, has been of interest to you so far. We're blessed with ICD to have such good teachers. I know you've heard from several already on these points. And the one that falls to me today to speak about is often called right action or wise action. But immediately I can see some, for myself, see some pitfalls in, right action. That's immediately a little dualistic. I mean, you got some right action and wrong action, and who's making those rules about what's right and wrong, right? And we can, right? So right, that's often in the eye of the beholder. Wise action, that sounds a little better, to be wise about our behavior and our functioning. But if I have to drill down, I would say appropriate might be the closer translation to all of these: right view, right intention, right action, right livelihood. Appropriate. What is appropriate to the world, the causes and conditions of the world? And perhaps that's a little more of a flavor of Zen. Because the Eightfold Path emerges from the powerful teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Most meditation practices trace their lineages back to the historical Buddha, not the only person to realize the human condition to great depth, but certainly one of the most talented people to do so. It's very difficult to take an understanding or a realization and then to be able to create a teaching from it. Something simple, something a system of 3 or 4 or maybe 8. So this Eightfold Path emerges from the direct experience and understanding of human condition, which is not different than it was 2,500 years ago in India. Human life, the world, and the world of causes and conditions, and the fact of dukkha, dissatisfactoriness, impermanence, all of the same ingredients. And the good news of what the Buddha was able to articulate is, although dukkha or suffering, dissatisfactoriness, the whole spectrum of that experience is unavoidable, there's hand in glove in the human condition, it does turn out that a lot of it is unnecessary and can be curtailed or let go of. That most dukkha or dissatisfaction emerges from a misunderstanding of reality, a misunderstanding of life that compounds. So this is in the parts that have been covered so far. It said that in the first 2, wise view, right view, appropriate view, and then intention. So view and intention, they're considered that's the approach of like the wisdom approach. Yeah, involved in prajna or wisdom. So that understanding of view, the wisdom is, what is it? To see things clearly, to have right understanding, to have right view, to see things as they are, which is can be deceptively simple, especially when the world and people are showing us a version of the way things are, or an idea of the way things are. And we also do that ourselves. Much easier to grab onto a simple view. But the world, as we know, is subtle and complicated and infinitely vast. So this view is more than just an intellectual view of the world. It includes the intellectual view of the world, but it's what we see, hear, taste, touch, and experience. And the surest way to experience it is directly, and that's our practice of meditation. To align with right view, the most powerful thing that we can do is to sit still for 30 minutes. To see things as they are. You see how things are. You see how this one is when you sit. And from there, the intention and the power then to want to live in a way immediately from seeing the way things are in our own life or in the world, the call then to want to do something positive about that, with intentionality to wish to live in a way which diminishes suffering, lets go of difficulty, lets go of division and separation, and instead promotes compassion and connection and peacefulness, arising naturally from the better part of our humanity. So there's a right view, seeing things as they are, and then intending to continue that close alignment with reality. Then from view and intention, we enter what is seen as being the sila aspects of the Eightfold Path, are more involved with the precepts. But if we're going to live in a wise and compassionate way, we're going to need some core principles and guardrails and guidelines in order to do so. And those guardrails and guidelines evolve naturally from a community of people living together. This is where the precepts emerge from. Understanding that when we live as a group, we live in society together, if it's the darker aspect of the human condition is the self-centered narrow view and the desirous view. What can I get? What do I, just maybe a couple of people close to me, right? We're still just barely evolved we're kind of early in our bipedal primate lives here, right? So we're naturally inclined to be more self-centered. So we practice in a way, living our lives in a way which will help others, help this one here, and help the group to prosper. But that requires some self-sacrifice. That requires some voluntary restriction, right? To follow a direction that everyone prospers requires effort and discipline. So before we had I'm going to go with appropriate, okay? So appropriate speech, and now we're looking at appropriate action. How do we act? How do we function in the world? Just on my note here from what we put out at the beginning, to behave ethically without harming others. There's a beautiful term in Buddhism, which is, I guess it would probably be Pali, right? The ahimsa. The principle of ahimsa, which is very accurate to the human condition, because it translates as do the least harm possible. I can get behind that. That's more realistic. Right? I'm going to commit harm. I'm going to do some harmful things. It's impossible not to do so if you draw air in this world, right? But to effort in order to do the least harm possible, in order that suffering may be lessened and benefit can be promoted. But how does that emerge? Like how do we practice that from a place of appropriate action? So we can look at it perhaps from two sides, two ways to look at it: from a side of principle, the intrinsic, and the other would be the practice approach, or more relative approach toward appropriate action. If we use meditation as an example, the appropriate action is to refrain from just pursuing thinking mind, conjuring up that kind of a hard I me at the center and just running down a laundry list of things I like and don't like. That's not meditation or zazen. That's just sitting, thinking about stuff. And take it from a long-term meditator. I've spent a lot of time doing that, right? But we wear that through as we learn the practice and really start to understand more deeply, and we gain we reclaim space around that kind of reactive function. So you find yourself being able to sit and just watch and allow. And the mind unspools its thought in this ceaseless ticker tape. Right? And it's not important what is written there or what is thought there. Right? That's where the value system comes in. This is not useful to think about. This is useful. Let me dig in on this one. Right? But applying right or appropriate action in meditation there is to decide to suspend that choosing and picking, and instead to just allow, become a mirror or a clear lens that the world is experiencing itself as. You're just that I, me, that is always sort of arbitrating deciding at the center, is allowed to rest, or at least is put aside. And we allow this experience to just unfold. And this is appropriate action in meditation. But we're not always sitting in meditation. In fact, we're mostly not sitting in meditation. It's a small fraction of our activity. So how does that function when we're out of the seat? Well, from the standpoint of principle, it's the same as the standpoint of sitting meditation. Right? It's entering each activity of our waking life, whether that's, everything from, driving the car to going to the grocery store to work, whatever you work or the conditions, and being able to, in accord with the Eightfold Path, see it as it is. So be here for it. Be here and involved. Be intimate with life and our environment. And then from a place of our clear seeing how things are, acting appropriately to the conditions. A lot of that can come naturally. Like a plate falls from the counter and shatters on the floor. The appropriate response is quite obvious. Well, don't step on that, especially if you're in the desert and you just got your flip-flops on or you're barefoot. But instead, get the dustpan. And then there's the appropriate response, the appropriate action. That's a straightforward one. Much more difficult when we're dealing with people. And more difficult when we're dealing with very complicated activities. But the principle is the same, in that the most important thing is to be present and aware and to have a clear view as much as possible, and not allowing the lens to become cloudy or narrow. Now, that's principle, but we also have practice. It's that the Buddha deeply awakened to principle. I mean, like, he awakened to who he was, not who he thought he was. Big difference. And then seeing the world as it is, not how he would like it to be. Also, big difference. Right? But from that profound awakening, which is really a collapse of the Jenga tower back to the original state of things, is struck with the realization that this cannot possibly be taught. No explanation will satisfy. It said the Buddha wandered for a couple of weeks without speaking, with thinking there's nothing to talk about, how can this be talked about? But it said that when his followers who had turned away from him when he ate some rice and drank some milk saw his countenance, nice, bright, you just meet some people and they're just really, the aura is there, right? It's like the Buddha they see and they understand that he has realized something very deeply. Then he decides, well, I have to make a real effort here to be able to try to transmit this understanding. And so we arrive here in these early teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And the Buddha starts to have followers, and then the sangha grows, a sangha like this. At one time in history, the Buddha's sangha was much smaller than ICD. Right? But it would eventually go on to, of course, be one of the major spiritual traditions of the world. But as the communities came together, they realized, we're going to have to put some rules in here for people. We need to have some guidelines for living together. So if we look at this, what is the appropriate action and the appropriate response more from the relative side? This is where we have the Buddhist precepts. It's not enough to just have clear sight and some wisdom about reality. That's a powerful insight and a necessary insight, but it has to go hand in hand with how do I relatively function in the world in order to be an upright person, a person who's helping, who's useful. And so these precepts come in, the three pure precepts, the 10 precepts, and traditionally this appropriate action, right action, wise action is in the heart of this precept approach. Right? Even the first couple, you can imagine these being the first ground rules of the sangha, people living together. Okay, do not kill. We got everyone good with that? No brainer. Don't kill people. Right? That's number one. Then number two, don't steal. Why? Because then people kill each other also, so these guidelines start to come in. Ways in which, I want that over there, but it's not my, ways in which there is a voluntary restriction or there's a common vehicle that we can agree in order for the betterment of the whole. Like how essential and how tragic that fast forward 2,500 years, we live in the mess we live in, where these core principles are not followed, but rather the default principles of a self-centered human condition are in greater realization than ever. Right? We don't make progress. The only one who makes progress in the way is this one here, the one that you are. That encounters a vehicle of teaching and of truth, and then decides, this aligns with my core principles. This aligns with how I understand the world, and then so to take that on and to make that effort in the way. But we know that there's also a downside. Right? There's a real downside to guidelines and rules. You should do this. You should not do that. As soon as we bring in a teaching or a vehicle of a teaching and a way to do something, it makes a shadow. It makes its own shadow. There's an old story in Buddhism of two monks walking, they're traveling to one place, and they come to a river, and there's a girl at the riverbank who can't get across. And so one of the monks says, "That's okay, jump on my back and I'll carry you across." So he takes this girl across to the other side of the river and then, sets her down. And then they get back to the temple, and the other monk says to him, like, "How could you do something like that? We took vows. It's in the precepts, it's in the Vinaya, it's in the rules that we don't consort at all with women, with monks. That was wrong." And the other monk says, "I put her down on the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her?" Right? So that's it's certainly probably an apocryphal kind of legend, but it just points to that thing about how the rule can then become an impediment. And that turns us back. When we go too far with the relative rules, then we also need the realization of what is absolute and what is the principle of the thing. Person needs some help. I don't need to think about it. Help the person. That emerges from clear sight. Walks like a duck, it talks like a dog. Right? So we have that innate awareness that can make that call. But it walks hand in hand with that relative functioning which comes from study and engagement and really looking into the relative world. And that's something that's never mastered. But we say it in Buddhism, you get the rock stars like the Buddha or Thich Nhat Hanh or, I'm not sure, I don't know, rock star, but you get it, right? You get the Dogen, you get these amazing people who come across maybe once in 100 years, sometimes once in 1,000 years. That's extraordinary. Most of us are very ordinary. A kind of mix of this and a mix of that, right? We've got much more in common than we have in difference. So in the Dharma path, the path of a bodhisattva, of a practitioner, it's enough to commit to the way. Right, but it requires that commitment. The Eightfold Path is a vehicle for ending suffering. It's right there. So if we choose, okay, I'm going to do this, we can do that. But we know in our messy human lives, it's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Or if I'm honest, 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes, right? Sometimes it's that way too. But we are, each of us, all the causes and conditions of the whole world at once. Not a lot we can do about that. But our work is to be exactly who we are. That's wonderful news. That's also the practice of still sitting and meditation. Just be radically and completely who you are. And deeply swallow down, allow and accept that. But if that who you are is also the whole world. And usually we can find some edges there that we don't like to say, yes, that's me too. This is all self. This is all my life. So we're always pushing, moving those, right? Expanding, deepening, looking deeper, broadening. But to be oriented to the path, that's enough. The basic truths of how we see life and the life around us, the core principles that are involved in betterment and benefit, those things that we can see and get behind. And then with our own best effort and with forgiveness for ourselves and others, we make the offering and make the attempt. Not for reward, not for a gold star, not for approval, but because that is the better part of ourselves. To make the offering and to do the very best we can with the causes and conditions that we are. And that once we live in that way, that trends, that gets its own momentum. Like a sangha, like this, gets its own momentum. We go through good times, and we go through some difficult times and trying times. How's this organization, this sangha has over the years. And yet with the effort of many hands and eyes, it brings it to this point. A room full of people, all engaged in meditation with genuine, positive regard and care for the people sat next to you and the broader community. And we keep making effort in that way. And if you ever think it's not enough, or you look, and it's easy to look into the world and be consumed and overwhelmed and feel small and inadequate. Like, what's the point? Remember that tale from the Jakarta tales of Buddhism, which is the bird that flies over the forest and sees a fire and is suddenly, oh my gosh, all my friends, the trees, the animals, everything's burning up. What can I do? And remembers, there's a lake a couple of miles away. Flies to the lake, takes up 1 beaker full of water, flies back to the fire, drops it on the fire. Flies back, does it again. And at least in the Zen version of this, it gives it the Zen kind of flavor of this particular tale, does that over and over until exhaustedly falls out of the sky. And the great teaching of this story is that bird can't put that fire out. But it can make the effort and does what it can. That's an offering. That's the path of the bodhisattva. But there's a flock here and many allies out there too. So putting these two things together, again, we need this absolute of this principle of awakening. We are so prone to being consumed by a narrative, ours or often somebody else's. So and having that time where we cultivate, particularly in meditation, clear view, clear sight. See things as they are as much as possible. And then the relative side. While being mindfully aware, also be involved in these practices which are time-honored and proven to be of use, and refrain from those things that cause harm. That's the other side of a precept. Sometimes the precepts, we take it as refrain from this, do not do that, stop doing this. Right? I was reading how, with New Year's resolution, the terrible failure rate of New Year's terrible failure rate of New Year's resolutions, right? They often fail because as human beings, we don't like to not do things or refrain from. And what's a much more powerful approach is replace it with doing something else which is beneficial. Same thing with the precepts. Do not kill? Well, turn that over. Give life. Give life. Give life to friendships. Give life to conversations. Give life to the community. Not just refrain from stealing or don't steal, but be generous. Be helpful. Give the greatest gift of all, which is the gift of your time. And so on. And you can look down all of the precepts and turn those refrain from to a positive of do this. Okay, I'm gonna pause at this point, and I'd like to open it up for any question, any comment, anything that you'd like to share or ask. I know I'm being quite loud in the room for hopefully the benefit of those behind. But if you have a question, then to kind of speak up and maybe keep it short enough for me to remember it. Yeah, I mean it. Yeah, please. Yeah, we're coming up on time, so we're gonna hand out our closing dedication. I'm gonna put it in the chat for everybody. So we've arrived at 11:59, which leaves us 1 minute. So we'll have the minute of silence. We'll sit silently for 1 minute. And at the conclusion of that minute, I'll begin going forth. Going forth into this world, so in need of light, may I bring all the kindness and wisdom I embody to each being and each situation that I meet. May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world so in need of light, may we together bring all the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being and each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice for the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace, and may it benefit all beings without exception. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.